Sorry it's been a little while since my last videos. I've been doing a lot of stuff for the holidays, with having the Christmas shop and getting things wrapped and then getting plans ready for Thanksgiving. So I hope everybody's excited. Thanksgiving is just a few days away. And for all of you who don't celebrate it, then have a good Thursday. So in this video, we will be reading the next chapters in Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. And this will be for part 6. And we will be starting on chapter 10. And there will be a gift reveal in this reading. So on page 109, which I believe is the end of chapter 10. So without further ado, it's reading by read time. Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco, Chapter 10. The Mary C., The Serpentine, Hyde Park, 13 September, 1888. Of course, I recall an Alistair that Father knew. I can't believe you don't remember him. Oh. Wrong person starting. Let's do that over. Of course I recall an Alistair that Father knew. I can't believe you don't remember him, Nathaniel said, looking to me for an explanation I wasn't quite ready to offer. Why this sudden curiosity? No reason, really. Avoiding his gaze, I watched a flock of geese fly over the gas-like surface of the lake toward the Royal Humane Society receiving house, their V formation as perfect as the crisp fall weather. They were undoubtedly on their way south, seeking a more moderate climate. I longed to understand the innate mechanism warning them of the coming winter months. If only women roaming the cold streets of Whitechapel could sense the same danger and fly to safety. I picked a few blades of yellowing grass, twirling them between my pointer finger and thumb. Hard to believe in a few weeks winter will destroy the grass. Nathaniel looked exasperated. Yes, well, until next spring, when it stubbornly pushes its way out of its frozen grave. Hope for life ever eternal. If only there were a way to cure life's most fatal disease, I mumbled to myself. Which would be what, exactly? I glanced at my brother then, looked away, shrugging. Death. Then I could revive Thornley and ask him all the questions he'd left me with. I'd even have a mother if it were possible to bring the dead back like perennial plants. Nathaniel's eyes were fixed worriedly on mine. He probably thought Uncle's eccentricities were poorly affecting me. If you thought Uncle's eccentricities were... would you attempt such a thing with science? Would death become a thing of the past then? The boundaries of right and wrong were so less certain when a loved one was involved. Life would be unimaginably different with Mother still alive. Yet, would the creature ever come close to the real thing? I shuddered to think what could happen. No, I said slowly. I don't suppose I would. A tiny songbird chirped from a branch stretching lazily above our heads. Tearing a piece of my honey biscuit, I tossed it over. 2 larger birds swooped in, fighting for a nibble. Darwin's survival of the fittest on full display until Nathaniel crumbled his entire biscuit up, throwing 100 pieces over to the squabbling birds, each of them with more food than they knew what to do with now. You're hopeless. I shook my head. He'd make for a horrible naturalist, constantly altering scientific data with his kindness. He brushed his gloved fingers off on a hand-stitched napkin, then sat back, watching as the little birds bobbed and plucked each morsel up. A satisfied smile plastered across his face. I kept staring at the napkin. I admit, I'm dreading the arrival of Aunt Amelia. Nathaniel followed my gaze and waved the napkin in the air. It'll be a grand time, I'm sure. At least she'll be pleased with your embroidery. She needn't know you practice on the dead. Aunt Amelia, aside from her daily lessons on tending a proper household and attracting a decent husband, had an inexplicable thing for stitching monograms in every bit of cloth she could find. I hadn't a clue how I'd managed sewing a lot of useless napkins along with apprenticing for Uncle. Between that and her constant religious outbursts, I was certain the next few weeks were going to be more tedious than I'd originally thought. "Where was it you ran off to the other day?" Nathaniel asked, dragging my thoughts away from sewing and other roaring good times. He wasn't about to let up on his inquest so easily. "Honestly, I don't know why you don't trust me. I'm quite offended." Oh, that was him. "Honestly, I don't know why you don't trust me. I'm quite offended, sister." "Fine," I sighed, knowing I'd have to reveal one secret in order to hang on to more important ones. "I sneaked into Father's study the other night and came across Alistair's name. That's all, really." Nathaniel frowned, pulling at his soft leather gloves but not taking them off. "What in the name of the Queen were you doing in Father's study? I can't protect you from your own stupidity, sister. There's no medical cure for that as of yet, much to my dismay." I ignored his jab, plucking a grape from our picnic hamper, which Nathaniel had ordered from Fortnum and Mason. It was packed full of mouth-watering delicacies, from imported cheeses to hot-house fruit. To appear less eager for information, I slowly pulled the cheese and bread from the cloth bundle and set the plate on the blanket in front of us. "He was a servant, then?" "Alistair Dunlap was Father's old carriage driver," Nathaniel said. "Surely you remember him now. He was kind, but very eccentric." A crease formed between my brows. Sounds vaguely familiar, but Father changes staff so often, it's hard to keep everyone straight. I spread brie and fig preserves across toast points and handed it to Nathaniel, before repeating the process for myself. Each time I was certain I'd resolve an important item to my dissatisfaction. It became clear it wasn't as it seemed. I wished to find one blasted clue that could point me in a fruitful direction. It'd be even better if murderers, psychopaths, and villains simply held a sign up for inquiring minds to spot easily. It bothered me such a savage could be walking amongst us. Nathaniel waved a hand in front of my face. "Have you heard anything I've said?" "Sorry." I blinked, as if emerging from a daydream, one that didn't involve murders and dying old men. My brother sighed again. "I said Father fired him shortly after Mother's death," was what he didn't want to say. Neither one of us liked saying it out loud, the words still too raw to cope with, even after 5 years. I squeezed his hand, letting him know I understood. "Anyway, he was dismissed abruptly. I never knew why," Nathaniel said, shrugging. "You know how Father can be at times, though. Mr. Dunlap used to teach me chess when no one needed him." My brother smiled, the pleasant memory lighting his whole mood. "Truthfully, I've stayed in touch with him. He couldn't continue as a coachman after being turned out by Father without a proper reference. I've met him a few times to play chess, wagering money and purposely losing, just to help him out some. His circumstances are sadly reduced, and I cannot help feeling responsible somehow. These days he works the deck on the Merry Sea." "Another life condemned to hard times, thanks to Lord Edmund Wadsworth and his own eccentricities," I said. I wondered what the coachman could have possibly done to end up a lowly deckhand. His only crime was probably being too kind to my brother. It seemed when Father dismissed servants, their lives were never the same in the very worst of ways. At least Alistair was still breathing. Miss Nichols would never inhale the unwholesome air of the Thames again. Misinterpreting my silence, Nathaniel wrapped an arm around my shoulder, pulling me into a comforting embrace. "I'm sure he's happy enough, little sister. Some men live for the kind of freedom that comes with swabbing the decks of a great ship and hauling cargo chests. No responsibilities. No need to worry about teas and cigar rooms, white tie versus black tie, and all that upper-class nonsense. The rush of wind through their hair." He smiled wistfully. "It's a noble life." "You speak as if you'd like to throw away your good name and swab the decks yourself." Nathaniel would make a terrible sailor, and we both knew it. He might entertain the notion of leaving behind the finer things in life for freedom, but he cherished his imported brandy and French wine too much. Giving all that up for cheap ale and dank public houses wouldn't suit him in the slightest. I smiled just picturing him saddling up to a bar, ordering something as common as a pint, his hair in complete disarray. Before he teased me back, our coachman approached, bending to whisper something in my brother's ear. Nathaniel nodded, then stood, brushing down the front of his tailored suit. "Afraid we must end our lunch early. Word has come that Aunt Amelia and Cousin Liza have arrived. I assume you're in no hurry to get on with your proper lady duties? Will you be all right if I leave you here to finish your luncheon?" "I hardly need a babysitter," I said. "But you're right. I'd like a little time to enjoy my remaining freedom." I grinned, knowing full well that if Nathaniel had it his way, aside from my maid and the footmen who were present, I'd have a bodyguard, governess, nurse, and any other attendant he could think of watching out for me. "Go," I said, shooing him away. He stood there tapping his sides, uncertain. "I'll be fine. I'm going to enjoy the fresh air for a bit. Then I'll head home." I crossed my heart. "I assure you I won't be sitting down to tea with any brutal killers between now and supper. Stop looking so worried." A smile warred with a frown, but eventually beat it out. His lips twitched. "Your assurances somehow leave me feeling anything but comforted." He tipped his hat. "Until this evening. Oh," he paused, eyeing my clothing. "Might want to change into something a bit more suitable for Aunt Amelia's tastes." I waved goodbye, uncrossing my fingers from behind my back once he disappeared from view. I'd most certainly head home and change out of my riding habit and into a new dress. That was, after I made a detour to the docks to speak with the mysterious Alistair Dunlap and sort out secrets he might be harboring on the Mary Sea. "Honestly, I don't know why you insisted on bringing that wretched beast with us," I complained to Thomas, as the leash nearby nearly tripped me for the third time. "It's hard enough maneuvering around in these cursed heels without the added obstacle of having my limbs tied together every 5 seconds by a nearsighted dog." Thomas eyed the silver buttons lining the front of my black riding habit, coaxing a scowl from me. His look implied my choice of attire, including a pair of matching breeches, should make for an easier time walking about. "I'd like to see you carry on with a corset digging its bones into your rib cage," I said, returning the favor and eyeing his clothing, "and manage a skirt still covering most of your breeches and whipping around your thighs in this wind." "If you'd like to see me out of my breeches, simply ask, Wadsworth. I'm more than happy to accommodate you on that front." "Scoundrel!" I like Thomas. Okay, sorry, continuing. He'd supposedly been taking the lop-eared, brown and white mongrel for a walk around the lake when he happened upon my picnic, an excuse I'd found highly suspect, especially when he'd happened to run into me while John, the footman, was repacking the hamper. Thomas had snatched a few pieces of braised pork for his canine champion to snack on. I sent the empty hamper home, along with John and my maid, both of whom looked only too pleased to be escaping one of my schemes. When I pointed out the unlikelihood of the coincidence, Thomas stated it was serendipity, and to be thankful for his gentlemanly company while parading around in front of pirates and ruffians. He should be thankful I didn't accidentally stab him with my hat-pin, though I was secretly pleased he'd sought me out. The cobbled street was wide yet awkward to navigate with so much commotion going on. Men hoisted chests off the side of large ships, the wooden boxes dangling precariously from ropes above their heads. Barrels of wine were rolled into warehouses, along with large metal bins of tobacco. Women shouted out specials on what they were selling a few streets over, everything from baked goods to mending torn sails. We crossed from one basin into another, separating the next set of ships. Shop after shop was dedicated to maritime adventures, boasting in the windows golden compasses, sextants, chronometers, and all other ship-themed paraphernalia one could desire. I watched a custom-house officer check cargo coming off the nearest vessel, the brass buttons on his jacket winking in the afternoon sun. He smiled, tipping his cap as I neared, causing my cheeks to pink. "Come now," Thomas snorted. "He's not nearly as handsome as I." "Thomas!" I hissed, jabbing him with my elbow. He feigned injury, but I could tell he was pleased my attention had been restored to him. Stores gave way to shabby houses piled together like nesting rats. Refuse stunk up the gutters in this neighborhood, mixing with the scent of dead fish washing ashore. Thank goodness for the strong breeze coming in off the water, whipping my onyx locks and testing the fit of my velvet hat. "Toby?" he said, responding to a question I didn't ask, while observing the oh, I hate this word. Cacophony. It trips me up every time. Cacophony going on around us. He's more intelligent than half the police force at Scotland Yard, Wadsworth. You should be kissing the very ground I walk upon for bringing such a fine animal. Or perhaps you could just kiss my cheek. Give the officers and ruffians a bit of a thrill. Ignoring his attempt at improper flirting, I watched the dog waddle down the road and onto the dock, amazed it hadn't walked itself right off the piers. It was the clumsiest animal I'd ever encountered. I much preferred cats and their insatiable curiosity. Is Toby your family's dog, then? Thomas counted off boats, reading names under his breath as we made our way down to the merry sea. I borrowed him. He stopped in front of a new basin of ships, the forest of masts looming high above our heads, swaying and creaking with the rolling tide. This section was noisier. I could hardly keep a thought in my head without it turning into some sailor's boisterous tune. Nathaniel would be horrified if he knew I was hearing such vile language, making it all the more appealing somehow. Goats bleated, and exotic birds cawed from the deck of one ship, encouraging me to crane my neck until I caught a glimpse of brightly colored macaw feathers flapping against a cage. Oh, on the very same boat an enormous elephant trumpeted, stomping its feet as a slew of deckhands tried unloading it. Names on the crates suggested they were part of the traveling circus arriving in town. Up until the last few weeks, I'd been looking forward to attending the event with my brother. The human curiosity attraction were world famous and boasted of several must-see-to-believe acts. I've heard rumors of a man who swallows fire, I said to Thomas as we passed the ship, and another who's got 4 legs, if such things are to be believed. You don't say, he said. Personally, I'd rather stay in reading. Queen Victoria was a great fan of the circus and would make an appearance on opening night. Everyone who thought themselves important, and some who actually were, would be in attendance. Look! I pointed to the ship we'd been seeking. There it is, the Merry Sea. Stay close, Wadsworth, he said. I don't care for the look of these fellows. I peered up at Thomas, a subtle warmth spreading through my limbs. Be careful, Mr. Cresswell. Someone might think you're beginning to care for me. He glanced in my direction, drawing his brows together as if I'd said something particularly strange. Then I should like to meet that person. They'd be quite astute. Without uttering another word, he walked forward, leaving me gaping after him for a moment, stunned. What a horrid liar he was! I gathered myself and hurried after him. The ship was the size of a small man-made island of steel, gray and desolate as a normal London day. It was easily twice the length of every other ship at dock, and the crew looked twice as mean. As we approached the captain, a burly man with black eyes and broken teeth, docile-seeming Toby took on the ferocity of a dire wolf, bearing his canines and growling loud enough to be intimidating. Oh, I don't know, that didn't seem right in my head. I'm going to reread that sentence. As we approached the captain, a burly man with black eyes and broken teeth, docile-seeming Toby took on the ferocity of a dire wolf, bearing his canines and growling loud enough to be intimidating. Much better. Okay, moving on. The captain took a look at the dog, then passed a quick glance over us. This ain't no place for a young lady. Move along. I had half a mind to bare my teeth as Toby had. It was working wonders for him, but smiled sweetly, showing just the right amount of my pearly whites. Aunt Amelia always said men could be charmed easily. I'm looking for an Alistair Dunlap. We were told he's under your employ. The captain, vile creature he was, spit into the water, eyeing me suspiciously. What's it to you? Thomas tensed beside me, his hand flexing at his side. I smiled again, this time staring purposefully at a point over the captain's shoulder. I tried my aunt's cunning and polite way. Now it was time to do things in my own manner. I'd hate to make a scene and call that charming custom house officer over here. I said. Really, one shouldn't operate such an important ship without the proper documentation for all their cargo. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Cresswell? Certainly, Thomas said, letting Toby's leash go slack. The captain took an unsteady step away from the growling mutt. Not to mention, it'd be catastrophic if men hiring such a ship discovered part of their cargo was being sold on the side. Doesn't your family know most of the aristocracy in Europe, Miss Wadsworth? Indeed, I confirmed while the captain visibly squirmed in his boots. We do. You come from equally good stock, don't you, Mr. Cresswell? Indeed, he answered, smiling. I do. A look of pure hatred crossed the captain's face. Apparently he wasn't someone who enjoyed being bested by a clever-mouthed boy and girl. The captain grunted. He's making a delivery at the Jolly Jack. Should be unloading round in the alley. Okay, that was the end of Chapter 10. We'll be picking up on Chapter 11 in just a bit. But we get to open our gift that was at the end of page 109 somewhere. So, yay! I'm excited! Chapter 9, Chapter 10, page 109, gift. Open at end of page 109. Wonder what it is. Yay! Oh, it's kind of tied a lot, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to get it open. Yay! Okay. Now I gotta open it like this. It's a little package. Okay, I'm done with the burlap sack. Put it over there. Wonder what it will be. Oh! It's a wolf for the dire wolf. Look how cute. Oh, I wonder if he'll fit in my box with all the other stuff. Let's see. I don't know. Is your home gonna be in here? Let's see. No, he won't fit in the box. But that's okay, he can guard the box. Ta-da, he will guard it. Yay! That was exciting. Okay, now we'll go ahead and start Chapter 11. Let's see how long it is first. Oh, good, yeah. And then we'll call it this video. Chapter 11, Something Wicked. Jolly Jack Public House, London, 13 September 1888. Thanks to poor directions given by the unpleasant captain, we wandered down a few dead-end streets before finding ourselves at the disputable but lively public house. Oh, disreputable but lively public house. A painted wooden sign depicting a grinning white skull on a black flag hung over the door. Inside, men sat hunched over tankards, swigging pints, and wiping their mouths with torn sleeves, while women slunk around like wild cats on the prowl. Giving up any pretense of fitting in, I strode through the room with my head held high, stares and whispers rolling in my wake. Most high-born women didn't roam around in all black riding ensembles, with leather boots and gloves, while wearing riding habits when one wasn't riding was slowly coming into fashion. The color of my attire and material was what set me apart. I hoped I inspired a sense of unease, even if it was fleeting. Once we reached the back alley, we were met with nothing but the sounds of our own beating hearts and Toby's panting. I removed my gloves and rubbed behind his furry ears. "Do you see him?" I asked, taking quick stock of our surroundings. An open crate sat on top of several others that must have been unloaded recently, but there was no one here. I walked over to the wooden box and glanced inside. It was filled with rows of glasses. I imagined rowdy patrons broke a lot of them once they were well into their cups. Not exactly what I expected the captain to be selling on the black market, but profitable for him nonetheless. Thomas knit his brows, staring at the crate. "Seems a bit odd that Mr. Dunlap would leave these goods unattended." "Perhaps he's inside?" Without waiting for his response, I turned on my heel and marched back into the noisy pub. I leaned over the scored wooden bar, practically shouting to get the barkeep's attention. The rotund woman wiped her hands on a dirty dish towel, running her gaze over me as if I were a complete waste of time. So much for fear-inspiring ensembles. Might as well have dressed in my Sunday best and left the leather for butchers. "Shot of bourbon, miss?" she sneered, wiping out a Pilsner glass with the rag, filling it with dark amber liquid and sliding it to a burly man at the end of the bar. I watched him take a deep pull of the drink. I couldn't control my lip from curling at his ability to ignore the cesspool of filth that had been wiped all around the glass. God only knew what kind of disease he was potentially being exposed to. I longed to take the rag back to Uncle's laboratory and run a series of tests on it. The group of men closest laughed, pulling me into the present. I gripped my fist, digging my nails into my palms for crescent-shaped serenity. "Where's the man who's delivering the glasses? He wasn't out back, and his employer has a message for him." I leaned closer, dropping my voice to a stage whisper. "I suspect it has something to do with the custom house officer who boarded his ship with a contingent of men looking for stolen goods. They may be heading here as we speak." I let my suggestion hang in the air. Her eyes went wide in her ruddy cheeks. I kept my expression neutral, though I was quite pleased the way the lie came so naturally, and at the reaction it fostered in a woman who looked scarier than some of the sea-wrecked men. Swallowing audibly, she pointed toward the door to the alley. He's just outside." Producing a large knife from under the counter, she hacked a fish apart on a wooden carving board. "I'll gut him next time I see him. You tell him next time he see Mary, he better run." That explained the name of the ship. She waved the knife in the air, hollering at an impatient patron, holding his empty mug in her line of sight. "Keep swinging that in me face, and it won't be the only thing I chop off, Billy." I slipped out the door again, shaking my head at Thomas before quickly filling him in. Thomas knelt beside a crate, sticking his finger in something wet and rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. I gulped down a rising sense of panic when I noticed what he'd found. Perhaps he broke a glass and went to get a bandage. Thomas didn't dignify with an answer. He stood, leading Toby close to the blood. "Toby, find." He gently commanded the animal. I watched in amazement as the dog obediently sniffed around until he picked up the scent. His tail wagged so hard I thought he'd take off like a bird, flying through the cross streets and alleyways. Thomas let the leash go, and we trotted behind the dog while he ran down one alley, then the next. We'd gone only about 5 streets over when I saw a heap of tethered clothing propped against an abandoned building. A man was sitting with his legs outstretched, his chin resting on his chest, eyes closed peacefully. His hand dripped spots of blood onto his shirt. I breathed a sigh of relief. A miserable drunk with a small cut was something I could deal with. Toby stopped a few feet from the man, growling low in his throat. "Audrey Rose, wait." Thomas grabbed for my coat sleeve, but I maneuvered out of reach. I thought it odd Thomas finally used my Christian name, but didn't stop to ponder it or his worried tone. It was getting late in the day. Nathaniel would be expecting me for supper shortly, and I didn't want to explain why I was only just arriving home after our lunch at the park. Walking right up to the indisposed man, I cleared my throat. He didn't move. I tried again, a bit louder this time, with the same results. Blasted sailors and their love of all things liquid. I heard Thomas saying something behind me, but ignored him, bending to tap the man's shoulder. Honestly, I didn't appreciate all the males in my life thinking me incapable. I'd show every one of them I could handle anything they could, possibly even better. I tapped him a bit more. "Excuse me, sir, are you—" I'd barely touched him when his head swung back, revealing a sinister crimson smile slashed across his neck. It wasn't his hand that was cut, after all. Someone screamed. Perhaps it was me, though it would have made me happier if it were Thomas. Blasted Cresswell. Thomas pulled me back, rocking me gently in his arms, and I didn't even care that it was vastly inappropriate. Divorce yourself from emotions, Audrey Rose. See it like an equation that needs solving. That's all it is now. It's going to be all right. When I looked at my hands, I knew that was a horrible lie. Everything was most certainly not okay, and this was no mathematical equation. My hands were covered in sticky blood. I frantically wiped them off on my bodice, but it was no use. Blood stained my fingers in a crimson accusation. Somehow, some way, I was responsible for this man's death. Nathaniel sat with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, looking more serious than a man facing a firing squad. When the detective inspector showed up on our doorstep with me covered in blood and shivering beneath a horse blanket, he'd gone deathly pale. My aunt had nearly fainted herself when she'd seen me and ushered her daughter into their rooms, promising a thorough discussion on proper behavior once I was decent. Something else to look forward to. Each time I closed my eyes, the scene replayed in my mind, the horrid, gaping smile taunting me. I'd heard police mention his neck was almost severed completely. A few tendons and ligaments were barely saving him from decapitation, a fact I was well aware of. I shivered. There was something infinitely worse about touching a still warm, dead person as opposed to cutting open the cold ones in Uncle's laboratory. Here, drink this. Nathaniel pressed a hot cup of tea into my hands. I hadn't seen him cross the room. I stared at the steam rising off the pale, almost golden liquid. It was impossible, but I swear I could have almost heard the last few strained beats of the man's heart as he bled out in front of me. Thomas assured me even if we'd arrived moments after that attack, he'd likely have died almost instantly. There was an agonizing feeling deep inside of me, wondering if I'd held a cloth to his wound instead of knocking his head askew, if it could have saved his life. What kind of girl was so accustomed to blood she paid it no mind? A terrible one. If there's anything else we can do, Detective. If there's anything else we can do, Detective, Nathaniel said, ushering the man from the drawing room. I'd forgotten he was even there. I heard snippets of conversation as they made their way to the front door. An identification card was found in the man's pocket, confirming my worst fears. Someone got to Mr. Dunlap before I could question him. Guilt wrapped itself so tightly around me, I could scarcely breathe. How many men needed to die before I discovered the truth? I sipped the fragrant tea, letting the warmth slide down my throat all the way into my gullet, heating me from the inside out. I knew nothing regarding Mr. Dunlap and his personal life, so I hadn't the slightest clue who would wish him dead. Was it someone he worked with? The whole crew of the Mary C. certainly appeared capable of murder, but looks had a troubling way of being deceiving. Mother used to read stories from books she'd brought from grandmama's. At first, I'd turned my nose up at them, thinking nothing good could come from such battered covers. I'd been snobbish and wrong. The words written between those crinkled pages were magical, like a fairy princess hiding amongst paupers. Mother taught me judging something from its outward appearance was silly, a lesson I tried remembering often. Recalling the way I'd curled up in her lap brought on a new wave of sadness. How much death and destruction must one girl go through in a lifetime? As the door opened and closed, I blinked tears back, angry with myself for not being tougher. Nathaniel sank into the high-backed chair across from me, leaning over to look me in the eyes. I half expected him to scold me for venturing out, being reckless as I was prone to be. Instead, he smiled. "You're the bravest person I know, little sister." I couldn't stop myself from snorting. I was a sniffling, teary mess, hardly the mark of bravery. Thomas had held me the entire carriage ride home just so I wouldn't break apart. I'd siphoned his strength and missed it terribly now. Nathaniel shook his head, easily reading my thoughts. Well, I hope not the one regarding Thomas with his arms around me. "Half the men in Father's circle wouldn't have dared to question men who work the docks," he said. "It takes an extraordinary amount of courage to do what you did." He dropped his gaze. "My only regret with your outing today is the horror of seeing that man with his... I'm truly sorry you were the one to find him." I held a hand up to stall him. I didn't want to think about finding poor Mr. Dunlap any more. I lifted my chin, chasing the would-be tears away. "Thank you." I stood, setting my teacup down on the table, and hugged my arms to my chest. I needed to get out of this room and clear my head. Reaching down to gather my skirts, I realized I was still dressed in my blood-smeared riding habit and breeches. Perhaps the news of my grisly discovery wasn't the only thing that had made my aunt nearly faint. First thing I needed to do was change into clean clothing. Even the strongest soldier in the Queen's army wouldn't run around in battered trousers, I assured myself. Nathaniel got up from his own seat. "Where are you going?" I smiled. "To change. Then I'm calling on Thomas. There are things I need to discuss with him, and I'm afraid they cannot wait until morning." Nathaniel opened his mouth, ready to argue, but stopped himself. I'd just discovered a mutilated man in an alley on the docks. Calling on Mr. Thomas Cresswell late in the afternoon was the least of his worries. He glanced at the clock, then back at me. "I'm leaving shortly myself. I probably won't be home until after you're already asleep. Please, for my sake, try to get home before it gets dark out. We've both had enough excitement for one evening. Were I to have another fright like it, I might end up dying on the spot." As we stepped into the hallway, I really looked at my brother. Stress was still getting the better of him. Little lines were deepening around his eyes, exhaustion taking an even greater toll on him than it had a few nights ago. I felt horrible adding to his already full plate. He was always busy studying, and now with father gone, he was tending to the house and me, all while some murderer was running around slaughtering women. I wasn't making his job any easier by sneaking out at night and finding dead men in the afternoon. I twisted Mother's ring around my finger one way and then the next. "How would you feel if I asked Thomas to come by here for a bit instead?" I knew it was an outrageous question, since he wouldn't be home to chaperone us, but figured it might ease his mind knowing I wouldn't be leaving the premises after all. Plus, Aunt Amelia and Liza were in the house. It wasn't as if I'd be all alone with him. "Audrey Rose, I'm not certain about that." He stared at me for a painfully long few seconds, struggling with what was socially proper and what would make him inevitably feel better. He pulled his favorite comb out, running it through his hair, then placed it back in his jacket pocket before finally answering. "Very well. I'll telephone him on my way out. You're not to close any doors." He took a deep breath and glanced down the hall. "Please keep to the dining room and parlor. Be sure to stay a decent length apart. Last thing we need are rumors circulating. Father will be home in less than 2 weeks. He'll slay us both if your reputation is tarnished, especially since he's—" Nathaniel snapped his mouth shut and turned. He wasn't getting away with keeping secrets that easily. I charged after him and grabbed his sleeve, tugging him back around. "Especially since he's what?" I demanded. "What aren't you telling me, Nathaniel? Has he been back in London? Is he still unwell?" My brother looked as if he'd rather be speaking with the detective inspector again, and an awful feeling bubbled up my throat. I shook his arm, my expression pleading. He sighed. It never took long for him to give in to his only sibling, and I felt only slightly terrible for exploiting that weakness. "Your father has been receiving callers in both town and country." "Oh, that's a different person, my bad." "Your father has been receiving callers in both town and country," Aunt Amelia said, emerging, it seemed, from out of thin air. She looked like a feminine version of my father and uncle, tall, fair, and beautiful. One would never imagine she was in her early 40s. Aunt Amelia embodied the very essence of what a woman should strive to be at all times. Everything from her neatly styled hair, to her silk-adorned feet was immaculate and delicate. Even the disapproving, pinched expression on her face was royal-looking. Though, after tonight's debauchery, and the rumors surely following, I'm not sure he'll have much success. If I didn't know any better, I'd assume you were trying to ruin all of your prospects." I stared from my aunt to my brother. "You said he hadn't left Bath at all." "A young man's been writing to father for weeks now. From what I've gathered, his family is very well connected politically." Nathaniel straightened his suit. "The merging of our families would make sense. Father returned to London to meet with him, but it was only for a day." It was as if the ground had split open in a giant yawn that swallowed me whole. I couldn't stop thinking about father secretly meeting potential husbands while he was supposed to be recuperating. But I haven't even come out in society yet. I said. "I've got an entire year before worrying about balls and parties. How am I supposed to deal with this on top of working for Uncle and the murders going on in Whitechapel? I cannot possibly entertain the notion of anyone courting me." Except for possibly one boy with mischief in his soul. Then a thought struck. Thomas's family was connected politically, as far as I knew, and we had been interacting for weeks. Could his flirtations be real then? Aunt Amelia crossed herself. "It will be a miracle if they remain interested in that merger now. You've got some serious mending to attend to. I'm organizing a tea for tomorrow afternoon. It'll do you a world of good, interacting with girls your age who are interested in decent things. There'll be no more childish games or discussions of murder. Certainly no working for your uncle and his unnatural science. If your father learns of this, he'll relapse. Have I made myself perfectly clear?" I stared at my brother for assistance, but he was preoccupied. "But—" Nathaniel checked the clock in the hallway, then gave me a sympathetic look. "Try not to dwell on it now. I'm sure it'll all work out fine. I really must be off. I was supposed to meet the head barrister half an hour ago." Without waiting for my response, my brother tipped his hat to Aunt Amelia and me, then walked briskly down the hallway and out the front door, leaving me alone to deal with the aftermath of the bomb he'd just dropped on me. Why was Father taking a sudden interest in marrying me off? And who was the mysterious man writing about me? If it wasn't Thomas, then who was it? An uncomfortable feeling slithered like snakes through my gut. I didn't like this turn of events one bit, and would do everything in my power to stall any courting. I clenched my fists. "Arranged marriages have gone out of fashion," I stated, hoping to appeal to my aunt's vanity. People would surely gossip about it. "First things first," Aunt Amelia said, clapping her hands and ignoring me altogether. "Time to get rid of those disgusting blood-soaked garments. Then we'll address the matter of your hair." She scrunched her nose as if she was observing a rodent rummaging through rubbish. I cringed. My hair had been the last thing on my mind after finding a man dead. "Honestly, Audrey Rose, you're far too pretty and too old to be running around like a tomboy," she said. "Bring your needle and thread down after your bath. It's high time we worked on your hope chest." Oh, hope chest. I don't know what that is. I'm going to have to look at what that is. Look that up at some point. If anybody knows what a hope chest is, let me know in the comments below. If you like this book and you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit thumbs up if you liked it, and hit that notification bell so you can continue getting updated videos that I should be posting more frequently, but sometimes I lapse. I do apologize. Okay, so that's it for part 6, I believe, yeah, on Stalking Jack the Ripper. Hope you liked the little gift reveal. Until next time, that's it for now. Bye!